your destiny. TheorySabers.com.
Hey guys, what's up? In today's video, we're going to be going over Leslye Headland's insight on episode 8 of The Acolyte, the finale. Now, regardless if you liked it or you didn't like it, good for you. So let's get right into it. As you guys know, one of the most talked about things right now is the fact that Darth Plagueis and Yoda have shown up in the show. And of course, with that leaves a ton of loose ends, a ton of questions that many people have, not just for where the story goes from here, but more so questioning the actual authenticity of these characters and how it lines up with, previous films, or I guess, future films if we're going from the timeline. All right, so Leslye Headland says Plagueis was always in the finale in every version. Now, there are obviously different versions of the script of the show, and I guess this is the one that they landed on. Creator Leslye Headland told IndieWire on an upcoming episode of the Filmmaker Toolkit podcast, Darth Plagueis the Wise is a Sith Lord referenced most notably in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, blah, blah, blah. We know this happened when, well...
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
No.
I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would tell you. It's a Sith legend. Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life.
Headland says that she has been waiting for many years for Darth Plagueis to show up in Star Wars properly. And she did, in fact, get to be the change that she wanted to see in the world. But finessing Plagueis' appearance in The Acolyte turned out to be as tricky to nail down as tracking a Sith. I guess it's not too tricky, as you just need Basil, the tracker, to sniff him out for you. There was a version where he was the button of the finale instead of Yoda, Headland said, but having the sinister figure be the last thing that we see never felt quite right. You want to feel Osha's triumph. You want to feel her joining forces with the stranger. Plagueis stepped on that moment. Osha's triumph? What was her triumph? The fact that she gave her sister up to the Jedi while wiping her mind instead of just they all could have gone away together, and if they wanted to go separate ways, they could have gone separate ways. She literally gave her sister dementia or Alzheimer's. Literally like the worst thing that you could do to a person that you love. And after all this time, finding out that she's alive. Anyways, we're here to talk about Plagueis. Choosing to be center, character-focused, emotional beats is always an admirable impulse, but it's equally impressive that Headland decided to find a beat earlier in the episode where Plagueis spying wouldn't distract from the catharsis of Osha's ending. Instead of a post-credits mic drop of the Kind Fellow series The Mandalorian has been fond of, I was okay with having the cameo come so early if it meant that I could wrap up these characters in a way that their final shot was not a "and he's been pulling the strings the whole time" feeling, Headland said. While him creepily watching them from the shadows this entire time, including the bathing nude scenes, I imagine, doesn't really scream that he's been pulling the strings. It kind of just screams that this guy is kind of just creepy, and he just hides in the shadows, whereas in the novel, it was said that he was hiding in plain sight, and that was the masterfulness of Darth Plagueis. The reason he's called the Wise is because he came up with so many things and so many philosophies and so many different ways of using the Force, and most notably was the way of manipulating midichlorians to create life. But now it's interjected that he has gone ahead and seen this from the witches and essentially copy-paste, and made it his life's work now to figure out how they did something that he and Palpatine, and then later Vader, could never do. Plagueis peers at Osha and the Stranger as their ship heads off the unknown planet, which at least wasn't shot on the same Irish islands as The Last Jedi Zoc 2, according to Headland. It was shot in Madeira. The gruesome alien, mostly, how dare you say gruesome, he is a beautiful man, mostly cloaked in shadow except for his burning orange eyes, needed to have an impact both for Wikipedia editors and the uninitiated alike. If you don't know who he is, he's simply a sinister presence that promises the Stranger hasn't been completely forthcoming with Osha, and that more forces are arrayed against her than she realizes. But if you do know, well, his appearance gives the season's ending a big hit of dramatic irony. Even though Osha and the Stranger are standing there, sort of looking out at the sunset, ready to conquer the world, the tragedy is we know they don't. We know there can only be two. Well, of course we know they don't, because they don't end up in the prequel trilogy or the original trilogy or the sequel trilogy. Also, they're humans, so, 80 years until episode 1, they're going to be probably dead or extremely old. We know there can only be two. We know Plagueis is there. We know that these two are doomed in some way. So to me, it's a bittersweet tragedy, this foreboding ending. But that's because I know about the Sith lineage and all these other things, whereas I think a different subset of the audience can be like, they're married, Headland said. Well, ultimately, they're doomed either way, whether you want to put Plagueis in there or you don't. It just really reads for itself, the fact that they have a finite ending, right? By the time the prequel trilogy rolls around, they're not there. They're dead. I like how she says she knows about the Sith lineage. It will take more Star Wars stories set in the High Republic period for us to learn to what extent Osha and the Stranger influence, mitigate, and or contribute to Plagueis' Let me just read that again. It'll take more Star Wars stories set in the High Republic period for us to learn to what extent Osha and the Stranger influence, mitigate, or contribute to Plagueis' rise. So with a season 2, we're actually really going to interject these characters as a sort of literal stepping stone for Plagueis to get his claim to fame, let's say. But Headland and her creative team wanted to infuse him with a sense of graceful horror and make it clear, even at a glance, that this is a monster who wants things. There's also a monster who camouflages his skin with his surroundings. This is, in fact, how he did that when Shmi was getting pregnant with the Force. He just camouflaged himself into the background. He's like, I'm nitpicking. And I really have to say that I at this point, like, I'm broken down, like I'm chipped down. If you look at kind of the trajectory of my channel, I was defending so much stuff that came out. I was like, hey, well, this is, how it is in the story now with The Last Jedi and this and that and Rise of Skywalker. And so how do we play this into the overall bigger story, bigger tale that is Star Wars, this whole timeline? How do we theorize, thus the name of the channel and the purpose of the channel, how do we theorize all of these different events into the Star Wars timeline? But it's gotten to the point where it's just, sure, I could sit here and theorize and make things and try to add to what has been created, what came before, what could possibly come after this, and no one would really bat an eye. But I have a hard time doing it. I don't feel authentic doing that. I don't feel real. I honestly feel like a sellout if I were to do that, because these characters don't feel authentically put in there by a fan for me. They don't feel like they should be in this story. Now, you get something like The Mandalorian, for example, which is kind of like an original tale. Man, I felt so inspired to make theories on, okay, Moff Gideon and the Darksaber and Mando and the timeline and the Mandalorians and how that plays into everything. I mean, that was the most fun time of the channel, really, when I was able to make theories on a show that I really felt inspired by and loved, because I was like, man, I can just dive right into this just like I did when I was a kid. But when I'm taken out of that immersion that George put us in so well, and Jon Favreau later and Dave Filoni with certain things, I just don't feel real. I don't feel authentic. I don't feel I feel like I'm a sellout if I do that. And just to make some money, just to get some views? No, man, I would much rather say my piece. And I know people will say this and that, and people will say this and that if I do like it. So it's really, at this point, I'm just going to say my piece and be myself. That's my stance on everything. Anyways, back to the interview. Obviously, the species has been determined, if not by Star Wars canon, then by Legends, and definitely by headcanon for everybody. So when we were designing him and talking about his appearance, it was a lot of Crimson Peak of Guillermo del Toro. Bro, that's like a nasty scene, man. But it was important in the figure's physicality and also the blocking of the shot to create the sense that Plagueis and the Sith aren't the armor-clad, visually imposing powerhouse villains we sometimes associate with the Sith. You mean Darth Vader and Palpatine? Or Darth Maul? They're not running the First Order. They're not running the Empire. They're not the Chancellor of the Senate. They're hiding out. The Sith, in this time, are fighting for survival. And as the Acolyte makes abundantly clear, when you're fighting for survival, then there's no such thing as a fair fight. Yeah, that's a fair point, but I don't see how it's relevant in this case. What plans does she have for Plagueis, and how is she going to essentially use Osha and Chimere to mitigate or introduce him into this timeline? It bugs me that we need these two made-up characters, and I know it's all made up, but these two randomly made-up characters that weren't established at all with George. And I feel like if you're bringing in a character from a beloved book like Darth Plagueis, which is my favorite Star Wars book of all of the books, this is the only one that I actually like. This is my number one, my favorite book that I literally preach to everybody. I'm like, you want to start reading Star Wars books? Darth Plagueis, number one. I think that his dynamic with Palpatine, his dynamic with his master, it's just such a... It has everything. The book has literally everything. And when a red lightsaber is seen, it's not by Jedi, it's by people that they're all going to kill who will never leave the freaking fire-burning room, it's from the book, to tell anybody. There's no politicians that know about Jedi dying, like in the Acolyte. There are no Jedi who know about Jedi dying. There are no Jedi covering up a story. There's no Yoda that could feel or sense Jedi dying. There is no one flawed man who destroyed everything and ruined all this stuff. You don't think with all of that emotion out there, like Osha being so angry she literally turned the blue crystal, the Soul's blue crystal, red. You don't think with all of that and the Jedi dying and this and that, Indara can feel her freaking Padawan when he takes his helmet off. Like that, no problem. You telling me Yoda can't sense any of that? He can't feel nothing in a time of peace where literally the line is like freaking crystal clean. And then all of a sudden, I mean, if you have a very still, steady pond, and you throw a little pebble into it, you're going to see that thing from a mile away. If you already got a choppy ocean, like in the Clone Wars or whatever, and there's tons of war and death around, you're not going to notice much. If I throw a pebble in there, you're not going to notice anything, right? And that's an old Japanese proverb from Aikido. Look, if we are going to get a season 2, we're going to have these two characters that are going to bolster Plagueis' entry into the timeline. Obviously, he has to kill them. That's what Leslye alludes to. And then we would start the story on Darth Plagueis and Palpatine. And probably season 2 will end with him meeting young Palpatine. Mark my words. And I'm pretty sure we are going to get a season 2. I would bet 99% on it, man. I think most likely going to get season 2. Probably 2027, 2026, 2027, something like that. So, hey, look, I don't agree with Plagueis being in the show. I don't agree with any of the choices, any of the characters in the show. I think it was the worst Star Wars show created. That's not me being a hater. I wish I loved it. I wish it made sense for me, but it really doesn't. And if Leslye Headland ever wants to come on the channel and chat about it, oh, dude, yeah, no problem. I'd love to see where her thought process was at with that. For me, I just don't think that Plagueis has any place in this story, and it really just detracts from his level of ingenuity, uniqueness, and the fact that he was Darth Plagueis the Wise. He's now Darth Plagueis the copycat. Darth Plagueis the lurker. Darth Plagueis the hides in the shadows and watches you bathe naked kind of dude. This is Higo Damask of Damask Holdings. He is extremely influential, extremely respected, and nobody knows that he is the Sith Lord of the time, of the era. So, you know, were there other Sith around? There were Darksiders. There were Acolytes of Plagueis, 7 of them. And I guess, you know, she wants to perhaps make these 2 to be the Acolytes that potentially Plagueis would have trained had he not landed on Palpatine. And to that I say, you know, okay, whatever, but it doesn't make sense that these characters have shown themselves to the Jedi, killed Jedi where Yoda has not felt anything. We have a good character like Soul who's just been shat on completely. He kills Anastasia when she looks like a demon. Just none of it makes sense, man. Corbin kills himself. None of this writing makes sense whatsoever. I'm with you guys, man. I'm with a lot of you guys that think this is just whack. I don't think Plagueis belongs in this timeline, in this story whatsoever, and it's unfortunate that he's been put in there because he is the character that I have wanted for years, to see in live action. And I would have been the first person to be extremely excited about it, but unfortunately I just don't think it belongs. I think it's shoehorned in, and I think it's something that Leslye wanted to do for whatever reason. Maybe she's a fan of him, maybe she thought it would create shock value, but I don't think that it's the right time to put him in this story, in this timeline, in this moment, watching these characters. These characters are nothing. They're nobodies to him. And the witches, creating them and their rules of creating Force sensitives through the Force, it just detracts from Anakin's legacy. It detracts from Anakin's uniqueness and how important the Chosen One prophecy was. Putting Ki-Adi-Mundi in there, just so wrong. Guys, it just didn't land for me. And I hope it did for a lot of you. I hope you guys are excited for it. I think maybe, I don't want to, sound like a schmuck, but I think maybe I understand the lore maybe a little bit too well. Or I just have my head wrapped around certain things that I can't budge on. Maybe that's what it is partially too. But regardless, man, that's the way it is. That's how I feel. This was her thoughts on Plagueis. So we'll see what happens with season 2 because I'm pretty certain it's coming. Love you guys. Hope you have a great day. See you in the next one.